Welcome to the Three Mouseketeers, the sibling podcast that understands your Disney addiction. I'm Jared.
I'm Amanda.
And I'm Emily.
This week we have a very special guest, Dan Viets, who is the president of Thank You Walt Disney, located in Kansas City. And we're going to be talking about the organization and some Walt history within Missouri. But first, let's get into some trivia. You guys ready for this one?
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What is the name of Walt's favorite horse on King Arthur's Carousel? I do have some multiple choice if you need it.
Yeah, because I didn't know they had names. Let's go.
Is it A, Fern, B, Jingles, C, Baby, or D, Queenie?
I feel like I'm leaning towards one of them, but I don't know why, because I'm pretty sure I have never heard of this before.
Right. So I am going to try to narrow it down a little bit. My guess was that it's not B or C. Those to me sound like Jared made up names. What do you think, Em?
Yeah, I was leaning, honestly, I'm going with A. I'm just telling you my answer right now.
I mean, you guys know how terrible I am at making up names.
Yeah. So I was either going to say A or D, but since M is saying A, I will also say A.
I can't even remember what D was.
D was Queenie.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I'll go through them one more time for the listeners, just in case. We have A, Fern, B, Jingles, C, Baby, or D, Queenie.
Yeah, I definitely don't think it's Jingles or Baby.
Me neither. I'm sticking with A.
Okay. Final answer?
Yeah. Let's go with A.
So A is incorrect.
Is
So
it
what?
D?
No, D is also incorrect.
Goodness.
Wow. So we really struck out. Okay, what is it?
Walt's favorite horse is Jingles. Jingles is the lead horse on the carousel and the most fanciful of the group. By the way, all of these names are names of horses on the carousel.
Okay.
So you didn't make any of those up.
I didn't make any of them up at all.
Why was it his favorite?
Well, you have to watch Mr. Banks to find out, or Saving Mr. Banks to find out.
He really tried to throw us off with saying that he made up the multiple choice. Like he made up the names.
I didn't. I never said that I made up the names. Did I?
You led us to believe that you made up the names. You did.
You put that in your own head. I just said I had multiple choice, and you automatically assumed that I made up 3 of them.
Yeah. You're probably right, but I don't like you being right.
You never have.
Okay, Jared. Now it is trivia time for you.
Okay.
I got a question for you. So, what was the first movie to ever show Mickey Mouse and Bugs Bunny on screen together?
The first movie to show them together?
Yes.
I mean, this is not how this typically works.
Do I have multiple choice options at all?
No, you do not.
That's terrible. You should give me multiple choice options because I give you multiple choice options.
Yeah, but then I'd have to know movies that had both of them in it together. And at this point, I know one.
You know, okay, so hold on. There's multiples where Mickey and Bugs were together?
I would guess by this question it says this is the first.
Okay. I don't know.
Is it animated? Oh, no. I mean,
No,
okay, no.
I don't think it's going to
No.
be animated.
No, what I meant, I didn't ask that right. Is the entire movie animated, or is it like one of those like crossover mashups
Yes.
where like all of it?
Oh, is it Who
Wait.
Framed Roger Rabbit?
It is Who Framed Roger Rabbit. M gave it away. Cheater, cheater, cheater.
See, that's what I was thinking of, but at the same time, I was like, I really don't know if either of them are in that movie.
They are.
Interesting.
There
yeah,
we go.
that
You're
wouldn't
welcome.
have even popped up in my head. Thanks, Em. Yeah. So anyway, yeah. Jingles is the correct answer
You're
for
a
this
little thrown off
extended
by that.
yeah, for this extended trivia portion of the show, I guess. All right. Well, Emily, why don't you go ahead and give us a history fact?
Okay, today my fact is not so much like history, but kind of just a fun, interesting fact that actually we can thank Jared for this fact because he sent me the link earlier and I really liked it, so I went with it. So this fact is that Disney uses a paint that they refer to as Go Away Green. And it basically, they use it to kind of trick you into not seeing things that they don't want you to see, like light poles, speaker boxes, things that are unsightly typically.
So is that why I always run into those garbage cans?
I think those are a darker green. This Go Away Green is like a lighter, like grayish green, I think is kind of how they described it. And it just kind of shows you how much thought goes into literally every detail at the Disney parks, because they even put detail into hiding or like playing like eye tricks on the guests, basically, with things that they don't want to stand out. And they say that the whole thing with that, I mean, I feel like you can kind of figure it out. It's kind of like camouflage where, you know, grass is green, trees are green. So they think that by painting this stuff green, you kind of just skim over it and don't think anything about it.
That's pretty cool.
Honestly, it's a good point, and it works.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of brainwashing to a very minute point, right? It's like, don't pay attention to the man behind the curtain.
Right.
So it's really interesting. I came across that earlier and I thought it was really interesting. Because I don't remember ever really seeing anything green, but now that I'm thinking about it, I do see speaker boxes and stuff hidden within like the grass.
Me too, like in the bushes and things like that. And I mean, even also the light poles are typically painted green. They are a darker green, same with the trash cans, but I feel like that goes like hand in hand with this and them kind of hiding them in plain sight. Yeah. There's another thing that this made me think of. You know how they're doing like the cavalcades now at a lot of the parks where instead of meeting the characters, they do like mini parades?
Yeah.
Well, right. So I saw a video the other day where in Epcot specifically, there's like some rocks in one of the pavilions. And whenever the cavalcades start to come by, some speakers like emerge from the top of the rocks. Like they're like automatic, and the top of the rock just like kind of starts rising up and it's speakers, and then whenever the cavalcade goes by, they go back down and it looks like a rock again.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, there's so much detail that goes into like keeping you immersed.
Yeah, just the design of the theme park in general whenever it comes to Disney is amazing.
That's what I was going to say, because even like the Eiffel Tower that's in the France Pavilion, it looks like it's way off in the distance and that it's a full size Eiffel Tower, but it's not. It's all tricks that they play on you.
Yes.
So they do that with everything. I guess even the garbage cans and light posts.
Yeah, they're very good at that.
Yeah. Pretty cool.
I thought so.
For this episode's tip, I want to talk about souvenirs. So we all know, especially when you bring little kids, that you have to bring lots of money to buy souvenirs, but there are tricks and ways to get around that. If you think ahead, plan ahead, you can bring a lot of things with you that you get from outside the parks, from buying extra glow sticks during Halloween to pre-purchasing bubble wands. There's lots of little tricks that you can do to make your kids super excited that they have a new surprise, but you also aren't spending a whole bunch of money.
That's really good. Like, can you bring bubble wands into the park?
You can, actually. I know for a fact, like Target sells bubble wands that are Disney specific because I've bought some for my daughter before, but I'm sure Walmart and other places like that sell them too. And instead of paying like $25 for a bubble wand at Disney, you can buy the Disney bubble wand from Target for like $10.
Yeah. It's a good way to save money.
I agree. And if you want to get like real sneaky with it, whenever your kid sees the bubble wand cart and they're like, oh, I want one, you go, okay. And then you like hide it under your shirt and you walk over there and pretend like you just bought it. And you come back and you're like, look, I'm the best parent ever. Look what I bought you.
And they're like, I didn't even see that one over there.
And you're like,
that's not the one I wanted.
In the back.
That's what it would be. That's not the one I wanted.
Yeah. No, I want that one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But those are good. Also, another way to save money on souvenirs, if you want to actually purchase them while you're in Orlando, is there are 2 stores called the Disney Character Warehouse. And it's actually a store full of Disney merchandise from the parks that they are selling at a discount. It may be out of season or just stuff they had left over. So you can go there and purchase things for a fraction of the cost.
So no Splash Mountain anything, right?
I'm sure there's probably not
I'm sure
Splash
there's
Mountain
probably
anything.
0% of Splash Mountain.
Yeah. So I know I've gotten some really cute pins there, shirts. I mean, they have decor, all kinds of stuff, anything you can imagine pretty much. But you do have to get there pretty early in the day. By night time, it's pretty wiped out. So
okay,
a lot of people know about it and love that store.
Interesting.
Both of them.
Yeah, I've been hearing there's pretty long waits.
Yeah, well, right now it's a little different because they're not letting a whole bunch of people in and you have to get on a wait list to get into the store.
Yeah.
So you sign up first thing in the morning and then they'll call you whenever it's your turn to go into the store. They're only letting a certain amount in at a time.
Oh, they can make this store into a new Club 33.
Basically.
Well, please don't do that.
Yeah, no joke.
And if you do, pay me. All right. Well, I guess that is pretty good information to have if you want to save some money. Thanks, Amanda.
Welcome.
All right. So the segment for the week is going to be hero or villain, and I chose Captain Gantu. And for those who might not know who this is the big alien guy who's chasing after Experiment 626. What do you guys think? Hero or villain? Emily, I know this is one of your favorite movies.
This is one of my favorite movies, and this one I feel like I don't really even have to think about much. He's definitely a villain. He doesn't really have very many redeeming qualities. He's pretty awful and evil, and he's hunting down this little cute experiment, and he doesn't even care that he found a little girl that loves him. He's ready to rip him right out of Lilo's hands and break her heart, and doesn't care who he hurts in the process, and he's not a good guy. And ultimately, at the end of all of it, he gets fired for it. So even the space villains think that he's bad. They fired him. Yeah.
You're getting pretty emotional about it. I love it.
Well, I mean, he's a villain, obviously. Anyone who tries to hurt sweet little Stitch is a villain. The biggest one.
So Nani is a villain too then?
No, because she ends up loving him at the end. She has redeeming qualities.
See, I disagree. I think he's not really a hero. All of them, pretty much. He's not really a hero. He's not really a villain. He's just doing his job. He's doing what he was paid to do.
No, he got fired. They even told him, you were awful. You went way too far with this. And this was not your job. You took it too far, man. You gotta go.
I don't remember any of that.
Yeah, he gets fired at the end, and he's like, at the end of the movie, I can't remember what her name is, but she's like the leader of the space people. I cannot remember her name for the life of me. But yeah, she comes down and she fires him, and then he's in his little they put him in like handcuffs of sorts at the end of the movie. He gets fired.
He's in the series, like helping them catch all of the other experiments.
He's trying to get his job back in the series, basically, is what it is. And he talks about how he used to work for whatever the organization is, and he's trying to,
do good. He's not evil.
He's even in the series, he's not good. Like the way that he goes about trying to catch the experiments and all of that stuff, like he's still the villain in the series. He's not a good dude.
You know, I see both arguments, and that's why I thought this one would be a fun one. Because yes, he is technically like the villain of the movie, right? Because he's going up against the protagonist, who is Stitch and Lilo, and trying to separate them and separate family. So you would think automatically villain, right? I see Amanda's aspect as he was doing what he was hired to do in catching an experiment that had gone rogue, escaped, and could potentially do a lot of harm to an alien planet, which is what we know as Earth. So there's a lot of back and forth that I have in my mind in that, but I think that I inevitably end up on the side with Emily, just because he kind of did take it a bit far. And
yeah, he was about to freaking kill a little kid.
Yeah, and the Galactic Federation did step in and relieved him of duties.
Yeah, he's just a little too intense. He needs to tone it down a few levels, and then maybe, I mean, he still wouldn't be a hero, but maybe he would be not so evil.
Nah, he'd probably still be evil. He's a go-getter, but takes it a little too far.
Yeah. So, villain.
Yeah, I say villain as well. Amanda, are you still on the side of hero, or do you think villain? Now that have we convinced you?
I don't think he's a villain. I don't think he's a hero.
Do you think he was a character?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. I think that he definitely should be considered a villain. So, sorry, Amanda. I'm going with Emily.
You always do. That's fine.
No, that's not true at all. Anyway, let's go ahead and get into the main topic. Great segue. All right, this week we have a pre-recorded interview with Dan Viets, who is the president of Thank You Walt Disney. So let's go ahead and get into that. Okay, that's going to bring us into the main topic. Today's guest is Dan Viets, who is the president of Thank You Walt Disney, Inc. They are dedicated to preserving and restoring Laugh-O-Gram Film Studio that Walt Disney created and operated in Kansas City, Missouri from 1922 to 1923. Mr. Viets, thank you so much for being on with us, and we're really excited to talk to you.
You're welcome, Jared, and please feel free to call me Dan.
For sure. So, Dan, why don't you go ahead and kind of talk about how you became a part of Thank You Walt Disney, Inc.?
Well, back in about 1993, I developed this obsession with Walt Disney's life and work, and especially his years living in Missouri and the influence that his time in Missouri had on his later work. So he spent a little over 5 years living in the small north central Missouri town of Marceline, and that time had a big impact on his work and his life. But he also spent more than 10 years living in Kansas City, Missouri. And I think that period of his life is lesser known, even among Disney fans. But he did some very important work in Kansas City. Of course, he was still very young when he went there. He was, let's see here, in 1906, came to Marceline. He was 4 years old. He left Marceline in 1911 when he was 9 years old. Moved on the Santa Fe Railway to Kansas City, Missouri. His father had attempted to be a farmer in Marceline, but that's a tough way to make a living even then. And so when he had sold the little farm in Marceline, he purchased the rights to distribute the Kansas City Times and the Kansas City Star, the two major daily papers in Kansas City. And he employed young Walt and young Roy to help in the business of distributing those newspapers. And Walt did not enjoy getting up early. I don't either. And I certainly sympathize when he was a little kid getting up at 3 or 4 or 5 in the morning to throw newspapers was nobody's idea of fun. And there was no question of being driven around. Elias Disney didn't even own a car. So he had to walk that route. And one of the things we turned up when I worked on a book with the Kansas City Star called Walt Disney's Missouri, The Life of a Creative Genius, The Roots of a Creative Genius, I should say. When we worked on this book right here, which I know your listeners can't see, but you can right now, I looked up, in particular, the weather records from the winter of 1911 to 1912. That was the first winter that Walt spent in Kansas City. And Walt had told his daughters that he had to walk through snowdrifts that were taller than he was when he was a little boy, 9 years old, in that winter of 1911 and 12. Well, they thought that he was exaggerating. I think most people assumed he was exaggerating. But indeed, we dug up the fact that the winter of 1911 to 1912 was a phenomenally tough winter. In fact, to this day, that winter is the record holder for the most snow in a single season, the most snow in a single month, and the most snow in a single day. All three of those records are from that winter of 1911 to 1912. So I think there's no doubt that Walt was telling the truth when he said he had to walk through snow drifts that were taller than he was. We also, in the film, Saving Mr. Banks, which I'm sure you're familiar with, and I commend anyone who hasn't seen it. It's just a wonderful movie in which Hanks plays Walt Disney. In that film, one of the most crucial scenes is his conversation with P.L. Travers, the author of the Mary Poppins books, and he tells her exactly that story. He tells her how he had to trudge through the snow to deliver those newspapers, and how even as an adult he woke up and would have nightmares about having to get up and trudge through the snow that winter. So it's just that sort of thing. I think is very important to understanding the man's life and his work. I, as I say, began to seriously study Walt's life and work in 1993, and shortly after that, Thank You Walt Disney came into being. And as soon as I heard about a group in Kansas City that wanted to do something to commemorate Walt's time there, I joined up. And so I've been a part of the group since that time. The original purpose of the group was to build a statue or maybe a fountain. The Kansas City has lots of fountains, or build some sort of a memorial to Walt. And then at one point, we thought perhaps the Walt Disney Company might build something there. And Walt's daughter, Diane Disney Miller, was very interested in Kansas City. We didn't realize it when she and her husband, Ron Miller, came to visit us and I think it was about 1995. and we gave them a tour of the city. She had never seen the historic sites associated with her father's years in Kansas City at that point. But she was clearly thinking about where to locate what is today the Walt Disney Family Museum in San Francisco. And she ended up, she looked at Chicago, she looked at Los Angeles, but she ended up putting that museum in San Francisco because that's where she lived. And that way she would be able to be involved in the museum on a day-to-day basis. At any rate, she was very supportive of our book. She wrote the introduction to our book. She actually says in it that if these guys weren't already writing this book, I would pay them to write it. And so it was very supportive. And indeed, the Walt Disney family, the Walt and Lily Disney Foundation specifically, are still our biggest supporters financially in this project to this day. They made a matching pledge of $460,000 to support our work. It was through that matching pledge that we were able to obtain donations from Kansas City area construction companies and materials companies and save this building. Literally, it was scheduled to be demolished by the city of Kansas City when we bought it because it was in such terrible condition. The roof had been built with about a dozen skylights in it. And skylights are great for artists. They're great for illumination. And in fact, I want to be sure to mention that the architect who planned this building was a famous woman named Nell Peters. Nell Peters designed this building back in 1922. It was a brand new building when Walt moved in there. But it did have that weakness in the roof because of all those skylights. And so major portions of the roof had collapsed into the building. And it was a very dangerous building. And when we bought it, we took the risk that the city would still go ahead and demolish it and bill us for hauling it off to the dump. I mean, that's exactly what they planned to do at that point. And we begged and pleaded and said, don't destroy this building. It's extremely important. And indeed, it was on the national, and remains, of course, on the National Register of Historic Places. But that does not save a building, and that does not qualify you for any grants or any money. It simply recognizes the historic importance of a structure. So we're very happy that we have been able to keep that building standing. And again, through the matching grant from the Walt and Lily Disney Foundation, we have poured a new concrete floor on the ground floor, installed new joists and supports for the second floor, put a new roof on the building, put some steel framing inside of it. And so the building now is stabilized. It's sound. It's no longer threatened with demolition. And we're ready to move to what we hope will be the completion of the interior of the building. And that's why our project has gotten some attention recently, because an outstanding architectural firm called Gould Evans in Kansas City came to us and they said, look, we will help you draw the plans you need in order to approach funders with a request for funding. We'll draw the architectural plans that would enable people in construction to give you a solid estimate of what the restoration of the building will cost. And indeed, we hope that's going to be the key to obtaining the funding that we need to restore this building, in particular the portion that was used by Walt. He didn't occupy the entire building. He occupied from 3 to 5 rooms at different times on the second story in the northwest corner. And so we're going to restore those rooms to exactly how they appeared when Walt was there. At one point, he had up to 11 employees, and they worked up there creating cartoons and undertaking other enterprises like filming young babies. And at one point, they just roamed the streets of Kansas City with their tripod and their universal camera in the rumble seat of a flivver, and would take pictures of people on the street and say, come down to the Isis Theater tonight and see yourself on the big screen. And so he had some very clever, innovative projects that he undertook to try to keep his little business going there. Of course, the most important work that was done at Lapogram was the creation of about 7 one-reel cartoons. Of course, they were black and white and silent. All cartoons were in the early 1920s. But they're very good cartoons, and they stand up against the best that were being made at that time in New Jersey and New York. There was no animation being made in Hollywood at that point. The film industry was still in the process of moving to Hollywood, and there were no animators out there. But Walt developed a crew who had worked, in large part, who had worked with him at a company called the Kansas City Slide Company, which transformed into the Kansas City Film Ad Company while Walt was working there. And he brought with him his pal, Ub Iwerks. And most Disney fans are certainly familiar with Ub Iwerks, who was a brilliant artist, a great animator. Some people think the greatest animator that ever lived. And he was a mechanical genius with cameras. Ub won an Academy Award for his work on Mary Poppins. And Ub and Walt had met just after Walt came back from World War I. He met Ub Iwerks at the Pisman Rubin Advertising Company in Kansas City. And they were very different personalities, but somehow they made a good team, and they became good friends. And they became not partners exactly, but they became co-workers for the rest of their lives. Now, Ub took a few years off and was lured away and made some cartoons for another studio for a few years, but he came back to work for Walt, and both of them were happy when that happened. At any rate, not only Ub Iwerks, but many of the pioneers of Hollywood animation worked with Walt Disney in Kansas City. Now, among those people, maybe the most significant were Hugh Harmon and Rudy Ising. And Hugh Harmon and Rudy Ising, along with several other Kansas City animators, followed Walt to Hollywood. When Walt went bankrupt in Kansas City, as he did indeed, without Roy's help, his business failed. And he got on the Santa Fe train with one reel of film in his suitcase and rode it all the way on the Santa Fe out to Los Angeles. And he almost went to New York instead, but it was the fact that Roy Disney was already in Los Angeles recuperating from tuberculosis, which he contracted during World War I. He was at a veterans hospital in the suburb of Sawtell, and that's why Walt chose to go to Hollywood, because Roy was already out there. And but Walt began to correspond with the nation's foremost distributor of animated cartoons before he left Kansas City, and her name was Margaret Winkler. And Margaret Winkler, back in New Jersey, was distributing both Felix the Cat and Crazy Cat. And those two cats were the most popular cartoons in the world, I suspect, certainly in America at that time. Walt borrowed, you might say, from both of those cartoon series in the gags he incorporated into his Laugh-O-Gram cartoons in Kansas City. But Walt not only worked at our building in Kansas City, he lived there. He had an apartment up on Charlotte Street in Kansas City when he first rented space in what was then called the McConaughey building. But pretty shortly after that, he thought, why am I paying rent on an apartment? I've got a great place right here. I'll just move into my studio. And so he ate and slept and worked in this studio for the almost the whole time that Laugh-O-Gram was operating. Wow. And one of the yes, go ahead.
I was just saying, wow, that's very interesting in the sense of he lived in that building for the entirety of Laugh-O-Grams.
Sure did. Yes, and one of the things that happened because he lived there, he said he slept on a pile of canvas. I'm not sure why they had a pile of canvas laying around. They weren't doing paintings, but he said he slept on a pile of canvas in his office, in his studio at night. And although this was a new building, there were mice in this building. And he said he would watch these mice come out, and they would take the crumbs from his staff's lunches out of a wire wastebasket. If you've seen an old-fashioned wire wastebasket, it's a wide wire mesh, and it's enough for a mouse to come in and out of. And so he would watch these mice who would come out at night and get these crumbs out of the wastebasket. Well, Walt then started to put food out for the mice, and he would see how close he could lure them to come to him. And he says one of these little mice was braver than the others, and that mouse became his pet, and that mouse lived in his desk at one time, at other time in a little cave, and literally played on his drawing board while Walt worked on the Laugh-O-Gram cartoons there. And as you might suspect, Walt said in many interviews in the 1930s that his inspiration for the creation of the world's most famous fictional character was the mouse he kept as a pet in the Laugh-O-Gram building in Kansas City.
And that was Mortimer, right?
Well, Mortimer was a name that Walt considered for Mickey when Lillian Disney and Walt were coming back from an unfortunate meeting with Mr. Winkler. Margaret Winkler had married actually Mr. Mintz, is what I should say. They came back from a meeting with Mr. Mintz. Walt had continued his working relationship with Margaret Winkler. She married Charlie Mintz. Charlie kind of took over. He was a sharp dealer. Walt's first series of cartoons in Hollywood were the Alice comedies, which he began in Kansas City. And when he went to L.A., that one reel of film was the first of the Alice comedies, the pilot episode, you might say, the Alice's Wonderland, or Alice's Cartoonland, rather, very loosely based on Alice's Wonderland or Alice in Wonderland. But Mr. Winkler had a contract with Walt and his studio to create cartoons based on a character named Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. And Walt and Oswald had done reasonably well. And Lillian and Walt got on the Santa Fe train, took it all the way across the country, going through Missouri again and Chicago to New York, and met with Mr. Mintz and expected to get a raise and renew his contract. Instead, Charlie Mintz had gone behind his back and hired away all of his staff except for Ub Iwerks. Ub was the only artist who remained loyal to Walt. And so Mr. Mintz says, Walt, I've hired away all your people. If you want to go on making cartoons, you're going to have to come to work for me. We don't know the exact words Walt used, but in no uncertain terms, he told Charlie, he told him he would not be coming to work for him. And he said, you can keep those guys. A lot of people seem to think if they could just hire Walt's staff, they could make cartoons as good as Walt's cartoons, but that never turned out to be true. So Walt and Lillian, on a train ride back through Illinois and Missouri, Walt came up with the idea of a mouse being his next character, and he suggested Mortimer should be the name. Now, I don't think that Mortimer was the name used in Kansas City. I think that was the name he came up with 5 years later, 1928. And Lillian said, no, Mortimer's, she thought it was a sissy name, I believe, is what Walt said. And so instead they settled on Mickey. I'm not sure if his pet mouse in our building had a name or not. Some people think it was called Mortimer, but I'm not certain we can verify that. But what we can verify, and I want to get back to Harmon and Ising in particular, these two guys from Kansas City that had learned their craft working for Walt Disney at Laugh-O-Gram. Walt called on Ub first to come out to Hollywood, and we even have copies. I mean, they still exist. We don't have them personally, but there are copies of the letters that Walt wrote to Ub saying, come on out to Hollywood, Ub, but the sun always shines here. There's beautiful girls here. You'll love it. He says, I wouldn't take Kansas City if they gave it to me now. And he convinced Ub to come out to Hollywood. And in fact, he also convinced little Alice, the actress who played Alice in the comedies, Virginia Davis, was only 4 years old when she appeared in the first Alice comedy in Kansas City. He, when he sent that one reel to Margaret Winkler and said, I've got an idea for a new cartoon series that combines a live action little girl in an animated environment interacting with animated characters. Mrs. Winkler said, yes, I'll give you a contract to make those cartoons, but only if you get me that same little girl to star in them. She didn't know that little girl lived in Kansas City, but Walt talked to her parents into moving to Hollywood so little Virginia could be in the cartoons, could be in the movies. And clearly her parents, her mother at least, was a stage mother. I mean, moves to Hollywood so a 4-year-old girl can be in these cartoons, but that's exactly what they did. And so the interesting point, I think, is that Ub Iwerks drove the Davis family's car out to Hollywood. The Davis family took the train. They traveled in style. And Ub moved to Hollywood, driving the Davis family's car out there. And soon, as the Alice comedies became successful, Walt had to hire more artists. Well, there were no artists, no one with animation experience in Hollywood at that time. So, of course, he called on his old friends back in Kansas City. So did Hugh Harmon and Rudy Ising, along with Ub Iwerks and Friz Freleng. Most people who like cartoons know the name Friz Freleng, who worked for decades at Warner Brothers. But Friz first worked for Walt Disney in Hollywood. And several others came out to work with Walt Disney in the very early Walt Disney Studio in Los Angeles. Well, when Mr. Mintz hired those other artists away, including Harmon and Ising, they very soon after, Mr. Mintz's idea of running his own studio really never came to anything. But Hugh Harmon and Rudy Ising did go to work for Warner Brothers. They were the very first animators at Warner Brothers. I mean, that's a pretty awesome fact. I mean, next to Disney, Warner's was clearly the greatest animation studio in Hollywood. Well, not only were they the founding animators at Warner Brothers, but after they worked for Warner's, they went to MGM. MGM said, hey, we want to make cartoons. These other studios are showing cartoons before their movies. We need to do that too. And Harmon and Ising move over to MGM. They're the very first animators that worked for MGM. Well, along the way, they trained other artists. And among the artists they trained were Hanna and Barbera. And so, you put together the Disney studio, founded by Kansas City artists, Warner Brothers studio, founded by Harmon and Ising, MGM studio, again, their animation operation, founded by Harmon and Ising. The great contributions that Friz Freleng made at Warner's, but he co-founded the DePatie Freleng studio, best known for the Pink Panther and some other characters. And when you put all of these studios together, that's essentially the entire Hollywood animation industry, at least as late as the 1960s. I mean, there were some other.
Seems like we lost you. I don't know if it's on our end or.
There we go.
Yeah,
I think you might be back though.
Yeah, it seems like you came back, but you did freeze for a moment.
I understand. Well, I hope you caught all of that because it's a very important part to understand. Very few people in Kansas City understand how important Kansas City is to the founding of the Hollywood animation industry. Now, not the animation itself, which clearly had been around since movies began in the 1890s, but the Hollywood animation industry can trace its roots to this little building in Kansas City, Missouri.
That's very interesting, and I guess that kind of explains why you would want, as an organization, to save this building that really wasn't up and running for that long whenever it pertains to Walt and what Walt accomplished there in Kansas City.
That's right. Another reason why it's important, the work that Walt did in our building in Kansas City is important because it set the pattern for the rest of his career in filmmaking. Walt not only made animated films, but he also made live action films while he was in Kansas City. They weren't major epics, but he made live action films, as I mentioned, of people's babies and made some money doing that. He made live action films which were essentially what we think of as a music video. They were live action films that were intended to illustrate the music that was being played by the piano and organ players in the theaters. In particular, there was a major sheet music publishing company in Kansas City, and they hired Walt to make live action films that would go along with their songs when their songs were being played in the theaters. These short films Walt made could be shown on screen. So not only did he make both animated and live action films in Kansas City, but if you look at the animated films in particular that he made, they are, for the most part, very loose adaptations of classic fairy tales and children's stories. In other words, he made the first Disney Cinderella in Kansas City. The one we all think of as Disney Cinderella, that's the second That's the remake of Walt Disney's
I didn't know
Cinderella.
that.
One might say, again, it's a one reel cartoon. But he also made Little Red Riding Hood. He made Jack and the Beanstalk. He made the other names won't come to me at the moment. But the point is that all of these cartoons were very, Goldilocks and the Three Bears were very loosely based on classic fairy tales and children's stories, as were his major animated feature films years later. Again, most of them, not all of them, but most of them followed that pattern. Another thing about Kansas City that had a big impact on Walt, I'm convinced, and I think many people now are convinced, is the fact that there was a world-class amusement park in Kansas City. It was called Electric Park. And that was as I say, it was a world-class place. It was called Kansas City's Coney Island. And it really was a magical place. If you can imagine, at a time when most homes did not even have electricity, this place lit up at night just incredibly brightly. We're lucky that we have postcards from Electric Park, and there are other photos, I'm sure, that still exist as well. But postcards are a very important treasure of storehouse of images, of historic images from around the beginning of the 20th century. So I've also become quite a collector of postcards, which in some way or other relate to Walt's life and history. And we have dozens of postcards from Electric Park. And one of the things that those show is that as the sun went down in Electric Park, every piece of architecture, every attraction in that park was outlined in white electric lights, just like happens in Disneyland today. I have to believe that had an impact on Walt's ideas of what Disneyland should look like. One of the other things is there was a train that ran around the outside of Electric Park. Now, that wasn't the only park that was built that way. I know Walt was also influenced by the fact that there was a steam train in Greenfield Village up in Dearborn, Michigan. But he saw that in Electric Park long before he ever went to Greenfield Village. The park had a water chute ride. Now, Walt didn't install a water chute ride in Disneyland. Imagineers, many years after Walt had passed away, created the former Splash Mountain. I'm not sure what they're going to call Splash Mountain now, but the ride that we have known as Splash Mountain, recreates essentially the log flume ride that was in Electric Park. But many of the attractions at Electric Park can be seen as reflected in Disneyland, Disney World, and the other Disney parks. One thing that I think illustrates what a big deal this park really was is that the famous band leader John Philip Sousa and his band were booked to play at Electric Park for the entire summer of 1915. Now, if you can book John Philip Sousa for the entire summer, you got to have a big operation going on. And indeed, Electric Park was a big deal, had a big impact on Walt Disney's idea of what an amusement park should look like. It was clean. It was very well maintained and manicured and landscaped and had beautiful flower beds. It was really a beautiful place. And there's no doubt Walt spent time there.
That's very interesting to know that could have and probably was a big influence on him and what he dreamed to accomplish later on in life.
Yes, exactly right. I'll tell you another experience that Walt had in Kansas City that is reflected in his later work. When Walt was in grade school at the Benton School, which was just a couple of blocks from their home, which still stands, by the way, in Kansas City, he and his pal, Walt Pfeiffer, who lived a couple doors away from him on Bellefontaine Street, they would go out at night. Walt Disney had to sneak out because his parents didn't want him going out to the vaudeville houses on a school night. But he and his pal Walt Pfeiffer would go out and attend these amateur nights at the local theaters, the film theaters and the vaudeville theaters. And Walt, for instance, won a quarter in a Charlie Chaplin lookalike contest. Later on, he became friends with Charlie Chaplin. He never would have foreseen that happening. But he and his friend Walt Pfeiffer did lots of little comedy acts. And that may be why, in fact, we have a photo of Walt Disney in his Lincoln outfit. I was going to say that may be why Walt ever thought about dressing up as Lincoln. But he was from Chicago. He was from Illinois, the land of Lincoln, and so on Lincoln's birthday, February 12, back in it was almost certainly 1915, Walt and his mom put together this Lincoln outfit, and it was a cardboard stovepipe hat. And his mom put a little mole on his cheek with makeup, and they made some kind of a fake beard up for him. And he put his dad's black coat on, which was, of course, a real long coat on him as a little kid. And he managed to look remarkably like Abraham Lincoln. And he went to school, and he had memorized the Gettysburg Address. And so his teacher, when Walt just spontaneously starts reciting the Gettysburg Address, dressed up like Abraham Lincoln, his teacher was impressed. She takes him to the superintendent, whose name is James Cottingham. And Superintendent Cottingham is so impressed that they take Walt around to all of the classes at his school so he can do this little Lincoln performance on Lincoln's birthday. Now, he did that again and again. In other words, for at least 2 or 3 years after that, he, on Lincoln's birthday, would do his little Lincoln routine. And Walt clearly enjoyed performing. He was not only an entertainer in other respects, but he enjoyed performing. He enjoyed, for instance, introducing the World of Color TV programs, when he was actually on camera himself. And that's really when people my age, at any rate, felt like we came to know Walt Disney. He wasn't just a name on a theater poster or on the credits. He was a real guy. And Walt had a great personality. He came across to people, again, my age, in the 50s and 60s on those television programs, initially on ABC on Wednesday nights, then later on, and the period I remember were Sunday night shows on NBC when the programs were in color. But the point I wanted to make with the Lincoln business is that, as you all certainly know, in about 1963, the state of Illinois came to Walt Disney and said, "We want you to help us build our pavilion for the 1964 and 65 New York World's Fair." And Walt said, "I'll build you a pavilion." He said, "I'll build you a robot that is the most lifelike robot that has ever been created up to that time. And it will be in the image of the 16th president." And that's exactly what they did. And that robot character who could gesture and whose mouth moved in coordination with what the character was saying was a major hit at the World's Fair. And after the fair, of course, Walt took that attraction, that character and his surroundings to Disneyland and installed that robot in the Opera House, where it still runs today. Now, it's not the same one. I know it's much updated. We can make much better robots today than you could make in 1963, but nonetheless, it's essentially the same attraction. And he does recite the Gettysburg Address and other, Lincoln speeches. But the point is that I always feel like when I go to the Opera House and see that Lincoln character, I'm really watching Walt Disney performing for his class and the other classes at the Denton School. It really just gives me a chill to think about that. There's so much more to the history behind Disneyland attractions than most people realize. So much more of Walt's life is in that park, if you know the history behind it.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Mm. So I guess that kind of answers a question that I had, in a sense of, do you go to any of the Disney parks? I am assuming that you have.
Every chance I get, when there's not a pandemic going on.
Yeah,
for sure.
But yeah, generally I've gone to Disney World once a year for about 30 years in a row. I've gone to Disneyland on a less regular basis, but it's really my favorite park because, of course, that's the park that Walt himself built, and it's a fantastic place. It's so much fun.
Yeah, it has his presence in that park.
exactly.
Exactly right. The apartment above the firehouse. When I gave a lecture at Disneyland in the Opera House, which was just, a thrill for me. I didn't get paid, but my recompense was I got to go on a tour of the apartment above the fire station.
Oh, wow. Awesome. How was that experience?
Oh, fantastic. Just incredible. It was just an honor. I would have paid them to let me do a lecture at the Opera House, but on top of that, getting to go up to his apartment, they preserved almost exactly as it was when Walt occupied that place, that was a really special thrill.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
I can
I bet.
imagine.
Yeah. I know you have this passion for Disney, Walt Disney and his legacy, and you have learned so much about him. What made you have an interest in all of this?
Well, I started life as a child. And when I was a child, I watched TV a lot. And so, my first exposure to Disney was the Disney programs on television. And, in particular, Walt programmed us baby boomer kids to want to go to Disneyland. The first time I went to California, I went straight to Disneyland. And it seemed like it was just, it was just destiny. It was just something I was meant to do. And I've never tired of going there. It is the happiest place on earth. But I think my interest in Disney grew out of seeing Snow White in particular, which I thought was a new movie in 1957 when they re-released it. Of course, it was 20 years old. I thought, wow, this is a new movie and it's fantastic. And I have to admit, watching the Mickey Mouse Club on television 5 days a week after school, and especially Annette Funicello, that gave me a heightened interest in Disney as well. I'll tell you, I've had a few peak experiences. One of them, of course, was going to that apartment above the firehouse. But another peak experience, I'm so lucky to have been able to do. I became friends with Virginia Davis, the little girl that played Alice in those early comedies in the 1920s. Turned out she was still around. She was still with us, in the 1990s. And so Leonard Maltin kind of rediscovered Virginia and talked about her on Entertainment Tonight, and she began to attend conventions and go to fan events. And the Disney company, finally woke up and said, whoa, here, this woman is a treasure. She is the beginning of the Walt Disney Company. And so we brought Virginia back to Kansas City. We brought her back on, I think, at least 3 occasions to appear at fundraising events for our project to save the Laugh-O-Gram studio. And Virginia was a ton of fun. And when she was in her late 80s or 90s, she was as sharp as a tack. She was always full of vinegar. She was just a funny lady. And so because I knew Virginia, I'm out in LA for a Disneyana convention, and the Legend Awards are being done. And it may have been the first year that they did the Legend Awards at the Burbank studio, but that's where they were doing them that year. And I can tell you, it was October 16, 1998, because it was 75 years to the day after the official founding of the Walt Disney Company. Dave Smith kind of decided, the Disney Company archivist, that the official founding date of Disney Company should be the day that Walt signed a contract with Margaret Winkler to make those Alice comedies. I think the founding goes back to Laugh-O-Gram in Kansas City, but that's another story. At any rate, so I'm out in LA. I know Virginia's getting the Legend Award. I call up Virginia. I say, hey, do you need a date to the Legend Awards? She says, well, I don't have a date. So, yeah, I guess I do need a date. You want to be my date for the Legend Awards? And I say, yeah, it happens that I'm free. I actually can. So, I remember I had rented this Mustang, and I drive over there. I'm not sure if I drove Virginia to the event or not, but we met up at the event. And it's like, they say, I call up, I think it might have been Jeff Curdy, but it was someone that was Virginia's contact with the company. She said, call this guy and make sure it's okay, and they'll put you on the list. Call him up, said, I'm Virginia's date. Says, okay, well, all right, you're on the list. Just drive up to the gates. The chauffeur will take your car away and park it and come on in. And I almost felt guilty, almost, because there was only a couple hundred people that could attend that event. It was a really relatively small seating area outdoors in what they now call the Legends Plaza, which is right in front of the Seven Dwarfs building that Mike Eisner built. You've seen that building that has gigantic sculptures of the Seven Dwarfs under the peaked roof of that building. So right in front of that is the Legends Plaza. And that's where the Legends Awards happened that day. So, they gave awards to some of the other people. This was an especially big Legend Award. This is the 75th anniversary of the founding of the company. Legends Award. So all of the legends who had ever gotten the award were invited to come to this event. So I mean, on that day, I met Fess Parker, Davy Crockett. I met Haley Mills and her father John Mills from Swiss Family Robinson, which I always loved that film. I met Kurt Russell. I met Glynis Johns from Mary Poppins. I met Dick Van Dyke, who was actually born in Missouri, by the way. But I met Dick Van Dyke. And the peak experience, I met Annette Funicello that day at the Disney Archive. I mean, that was just such an incredible day, and I was so lucky to be there. So anyway, so Mike Eisner is introducing people up at the podium, up at the front of the plaza, and he introduces Roy E. Disney, Roy's son, Roy E. Disney, who at that time those guys were getting along, and they were, Roy was on the board, and Roy introduces Virginia. And he tells people, just what I've told you, the important role that she had in the very beginning of the company, the signing of the contract to make the Alice comedies, the official beginning of the Walt Disney Company. She was Alice. And so he introduces her. She walks up to the podium, and she's paused for effect. She paused for a long moment, and everyone was waiting to hear what she would say. And she finally says, "Well, it's about time." 5 years ago, I started working for the Walt Disney Company, and they're finally giving me the Legend Award. So, she was pretty darn funny. She was really a lot of fun to hang out with, and I just really am so lucky to have known her. But that was an incredible day. And I was just, just pure luck. I tell you another one. I was out in LA for a Disneyana convention, and I had been corresponding with Adriana Caselotti, of course, the voice of Snow White. And she was selling these autographed 8x10 photos at that time. She, was doing a kind of a steady business selling these pictures. And when I find that out, I start buying them and selling them myself. I had a little store at that time, I believe, yes. And so, so I have an acquaintance with her. So each time I'd be out there, I would call up Adriana and say, "Hey, can I come see you today? Can I come visit you? Can I come meet you?" And 3 or 4 times she'd say, "Oh, I wish you could, but I'm just not feeling well. I just don't think I'm up to it." I was thinking maybe she was, really sick or something. But finally, I'm out there and I call up Adriana on the day before I had to leave, and I'm talking to her answering machine. I say, "Adriana, can I come see you today? I'm out here just for another couple of days. Could I come visit with you?" And while I'm talking, she picks up the receiver and starts singing songs from Snow White. And she's obviously in a much better mood. And she says, yes, Dan Viets, come on over here. Come on over and see me. Gives me her address, which is very near, actually, to the location of the theater where Snow White premiered. She later told me. And so I go over there. I get her some flowers, and I got my video camera running. I knock, and she had a beautiful home. She had a very nice house, a nice part of LA, a nice part of Hollywood. And from the moment she opens the door, I got my camera running, and she's totally okay with this. She says, "Oh boy, we're going to make a movie. So come on in and sit down." And she's got her baby grand piano right there with her Legend Award right on top of that piano. And I remember she's wearing a Las Vegas T-shirt, and she offers me a beer, and I say, "Well, if you're having one," she says, No, I can't drink beer, but you ought to have one." And so it was just incredible to be with Adriana Caselotti, the voice of Snow White. And she told me the stories that she told, hundreds of times on the Tonight Show. And every time the video or the film was re-released, they'd send Adriana out on a PR tour. But it was still pretty special to have her just telling me these stories. And she told great stories about going to the premiere, and how she couldn't get in. And she tells the lady at the ticket window, she says, "But I'm Snow White." And the lady says, "I don't care if you're the Wicked Witch. We don't have any seats left." So she sneaks in, and she and I believe it was Dean Stockwell, who was the voice of the Prince. The two of them snuck up into the balcony and watched that movie. And she really had no idea what the storyline was because they didn't do her work. It was voice work. There were no other actors around, and it was not even done in chronologic sequence with the film. So she really didn't even know what the story was. And she watched at the same time that Clark Gable was down there watching it. I remember Walt said that he knew he had succeeded in making that movie when he turned around and saw all these big Hollywood stars crying when, like I'm doing right now, when Snow White was in the glass casket, and then everybody cheers when she comes back to life. And, just having Adriana tell those stories was so amazing. I've still got that film, still got that. I need to dig it out and do something with it,
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really
put it up on
amazing.
YouTube. I'm sure that a lot of people would find it on
Yes,
YouTube.
they would.
I'm sure you're right about that.
That's
Well,
amazing. I couldn't even imagine
I
being
know.
able to do even half the things that you've been able to do.
I know.
I
this
know.
point.
You've had a lot of really special experiences.
I've been lucky. I mentioned earlier that Diane Disney Miller and her husband Ron Miller, who of course was CEO of the Walt Disney Company after Walt himself, the two of them came to Kansas City, and I think it was in 1995, and neither one of them had ever seen the Disney history of Kansas City. So we put together a nice tour. We got this little trolley bus and drove them around the city, and I got to help plan out, what order we would see these various sites in. We went to the Benton School where Walt and his little sister Ruth had also gone. And when we walked in there, the building was still being used as a school in Walt's old neighborhood. And we walked in there, and Walt says, the teacher who's on the stage. It's like a lot of schools combine their gymnasium with a stage and auditorium. And so we walk into the auditorium where we know Walt Disney played basketball and ran track. And up on stage, the teacher is teaching a class on the stage there. And they know what time we would be there. I just don't believe there was any way they could have predicted what time we would walk in. But Diane and Ron Miller and me and other folks from Thank You Walt Disney walked in there just as the teacher was telling these kids that this neighborhood is where Walt Disney grew up. This neighborhood is where Walt Disney was a little kid just like you. And, here's what Walt Disney accomplished. And that was a great time. Diane was a great lady. She was so sweet. She was shy, and she was not at all inclined to do public appearances in the earlier part of her life. But I'll tell you, ironically, what motivated her to become much more outspoken and much more public was a horrible book that I do not recommend to anyone called Dark Prince of Hollywood. You may have heard of that by Mark Elliott, I think is his name, a bum, an abuser of the First Amendment, who published an alleged biography of Walt Disney, which is just full of lies. I mean, I don't know any other way to put it. This guy makes all these outrageous allegations about Walt with absolutely no documentation, no sources, no authority for any of these outrageous claims he makes. And it's just terrible. I mean, I'm a great fan of the First Amendment, but this is the worst abuse of the First Amendment I can think of. To take somebody who's dead, who can't defend himself, and to print a book that's just full of made up stories, and for the most part, not at all complimentary. Well, that pissed off Diane Disney Miller, and she said, I'm not going to allow this guy to libel my father and to tear down his reputation. I'm going to fight back. And the way she fought back was to create the Walt Disney Family Museum in San Francisco, specifically for the purpose of telling the truth about her father's life. I mean, who would have thought it was necessary to do that? Well, until that terrible book came out, no one thought it was necessary. But the only good thing about that book is it brought Diane Disney out of her shell. And so she came back to Kansas City on at least one other occasion. And it was only a year or so before she died, probably, just 8 or 10 years ago. And she was invited back by the National World War I Museum is in Kansas City, and it is a spectacular place. It is the only major museum in the country dedicated to the history of the First World War, and so they had acquired an ambulance, and a World War I ambulance driven in France, and somebody there knew enough about Walt's life to know that he had driven an ambulance like that just after World War I. Walt actually reached France just after the armistice was signed. Now, at the time, he was disappointed that he didn't see any action. He wasn't in those horrible, deadly trenches. But in fact, his experience after the war, chauffeuring people around France, was really a lot of fun. He didn't see how horrible that war really was. But at any rate, they invited Diane to come back for the dedication of this World War I Red Cross ambulance. And I was surprised that she accepted, but she did. And she brought with her one of her daughters and one of her granddaughters. And I hope I've got in my notes somewhere which ones they were. But the three of them came back and attended a reception at the museum. And then Diane kind of presided over a little ceremony to dedicate the ambulance. I'll tell you, I remember one thing about that peak occasion was right across the street, directly across Main Street in Kansas City, was the Crown Plaza, not Crown Plaza, the Crown Hotel, the Hallmark Hotel, which was the site of the stockholders meeting. This was 2012. In fact, now that I think about it, I can tell you it was 2012. The stockholders meeting, the annual stockholders meeting for the Walt Disney Company, was happening right across the street. Now, I think, again, this was coincidence, but man, what an amazing coincidence. The same night that the museum is dedicating this Red Cross ambulance, and Diane Disney and her daughter and her granddaughter come back for that event, it just happens that right across the street, the Walt Disney Company is holding its annual shareholders meeting. I have a share, so I got to go to the shareholder meeting. That's why I bought a share, so I could go to the shareholders meetings. And I recall that Mr. Eisner sent a vice president of the company over to convey a greeting to Diane. And of course, she was gracious about it. But I'll tell you, she was pissed. She thought Eisner should be over here. He should be over here talking to me and acknowledging me. And I don't blame her. I think she was exactly right about that. But at any rate, I also attended the shareholders meeting. And I'm mistaken. It was not Eisner. It was Iger. It was Bob Iger, because I actually talked to Bob the next day. and again, we talked about a series of coincidences. So after we spent a nice evening with Diane Disney and her daughter and her granddaughter, next day is the shareholder meeting. I stand in line. They take your cell phone and put it in a little plastic Ziploc. There's high security at these events. And I think they must dread them every year. They must live in dread of what some shareholder is going to say at those meetings. I've heard from people who get up and are somewhat unhappy with the company. Sometimes it's employees, and sometimes it's just random troublemakers. And so at any rate, the whole company's highest administrators, Bob Iger, chief among them, are up there, and they show a little film about Walt's Kansas City history, and they've shown our building in that little film. And so at one point, Bob's up there saying, well, all right, anybody else have any questions? There's 1,000 people or more in this auditorium, but about 6 feet away, I see a microphone. There's nobody in line for that microphone. I'm thinking, damn it, if I don't do this, I'll always regret it. So I walk over to the mic, of course. I say, hey, Bob. It's a first name culture at the Walt Disney Company. I say, hey, Bob, we really appreciate the company holding its shareholder meeting here in Kansas City and recognizing the important history that the Walt Disney Company has here in Kansas City, where Walt Disney spent more than 10 years of his life and started his career in filmmaking. And that building that you all showed in the excellent little film that ran a few minutes ago, some friends of mine and I are doing our best to save that very important building where Walt Disney made his first cartoons. Maybe it's fudging a little bit, but almost his first cartoons, and where he lived. And where he kept a mouse that inspired the creation of Mickey. And, I tried not to run on too long, but I said, we're really struggling to keep that building standing and to restore it and open it to the public. And when we go to Kansas City corporations and ask for their help, they always say, well, is the Walt Disney Company helping with this project? And we always say, well, we hope they will. They're not yet, but we hope they will. So is there any chance that the company would actually support this undertaking? And Bob says, well, talk to, I think it was Stephen Collins, if I remember correctly, who was VP, one of the many VPs at the time. And if I'm remembering correctly, he was the editor of the D23 magazine, which I think had just begun to be published then. And so, I contacted him, but I never really got any encouragement or any real response. More recently, I've written to I'll tell you another peak experience. This is really helpful to me to remember these things, but I'll tell you another peak experience, which was just probably about 5 years ago. There were about 7 or 8 Pixar artists who wanted to see Disney history in Kansas City. And so I, again, just incredibly lucky. I meet up with Pete Docter, not just some Pixar artists, but Pete Docter, the now head of Pixar, and the sweetest guy in the world. I mean, I got to tell you, I had met him once or twice before. He went to Marceline. He clearly cares about Disney history. I met him up in Marceline. Then I meet him again, spend the whole afternoon with Pete and these other Pixar artists, showing them, all this great Disney history in Kansas City. So I wrote to Pete again recently and said, hey, Pete, we're still working on trying to save this old building. And do you think you could help us out? I mean, he's considerably more influential now than he was, even just a few years ago. And I mean, he's just an incredible creative talent. And I got a reply just a few days ago from somebody who works under Pete who says, gosh, Pete wanted to acknowledge your letter, and he really wishes you guys a lot of luck. But he doesn't really have much influence with the Walt Disney Company. And I'm thinking, yeah, well, maybe I don't know about that, but he just, I still have the feeling if I was talking to Pete directly, he'd be more helpful. I mean, he was just during the brief time I was with him, he was just as nice as he could be, and you could tell it wasn't an act. I mean, for instance, I've been doing lectures for the Missouri Humanities Council for about 20 years on Walt Disney and Missouri history. So that day I had my old Kodak Carousel projector, 20th century technology, and we're up in an architect's office, and I'm going to show them my slideshow. And as luck would have it, my bulb burned out. And my spare bulb turned out to be an old burned out bulb too. Pete comes over and starts tinkering with this projector as if he could somehow bring it back to life, but it was just so sweet. I mean, it was just an amazing thing that he actually, was willing to try. And it turned out we had more fun seeing the actual locations anyway than watching slides about them. But that was pretty cool to spend a whole afternoon with these half dozen Pixar artists and telling them the story of Walt's years in Kansas City.
That's great.
Oh, yeah.
So I have a question. I actually live in Kansas City, or right outside Kansas City.
Oh, great.
And you've talked about several different places that to tour to see where Walt has history. And actually, Jared and I went to the Laugh-O-Gram Studios and saw it.
Good.
I did.
Where else could we go?
Well, Union Station has a lot of Disney history. When Walt lived in the Laugh-O-Gram building, he would go down to Union Station once a week, whether he needed to or not, and take a shower. There were no showers, no bathtubs in the Laugh-O-Gram building. So that's where Walt took a shower when he was living in the Laugh-O-Gram building. Not only that, but that's where Walt left Kansas City from. Union Station was brand new. It was built while Walt lived in Kansas City. When his family moved to Kansas City, they came to a beautiful old, it's called Victorian Italiante Union Station, which was way down by the river, well, in the West Bottoms area. And it flooded, of course. And that's what moved the railroads to say, we better move our station and all the tracks that go through Kansas City up onto higher ground. So they built Union Station that we know today while the Walt Disney family lived in Kansas City. Walt was always a train fan. And he watched that building go up and spent time there, not only taking a shower, but, any train trip they took, it was to and from Union Station. It is also intriguing, I think, that Ward Kimball, you know the name Ward Kimball, the artist who is responsible for Jiminy Cricket and who Walt called a true genius. Walt didn't give out praise lightly. He was, in fact, known for not praising his artist's work, but he recognized that Ward Kimball was truly a genius. And Ward was also a big train fan. So he and Walt had that in common. And so Ward Kimball, when he was a little kid, lived up in Minnesota. He had an uncle who lived down in southeast Kansas, so that from time to time his family would travel on the train from Minnesota to Kansas City and then switch trains and go down to southeast Kansas to visit his uncle. Well, Ward said that when he was at Union Station, he would hear the announcers calling out the trains and their arrival and departure with a megaphone. There was no amplified electronic PA system in the station at that time. And so after I read the interview with him talking about that, when I was at Union Station, and you should do this, Amanda, if you look at both the west end and the east end of the Grand Hall of the main, the first gigantic room that you enter there, you see these little balconies. And from his description, I believe that's exactly where the announcer stood and with a megaphone, called out in a slow, loud tone the announcements for the trains coming and leaving. Well, what Ward said is that when Disneyland was being designed, of course, he was part of the team of Imagineers and artists that worked on Disneyland, and he was drawn to the trains. It was Ward who created the station announcements that we hear even today on the steam trains that run around Disneyland. And he said that the inspiration for those announcements we hear in Disneyland today were the announcers on the megaphones in Kansas City's Union Station back in probably the 30s, I'm guessing, when Ward was a little kid. So Union Station has some pretty cool Disney history.
Really cool.
Other locations. Don't get me started here, but it's too late. So I bet you've seen the TWA rocket on the building at 18th and Baltimore downtown. Have you seen that, Amanda?
I have not.
Go to 18th and Baltimore, just a block off Main Street. You'll see, in fact, this building occupies half a block. This building was the headquarters of Trans World Airlines. TWA's headquarters in the 1950s and 60s were in a building which still stands, and the major corner, the entrance, was 18th and Baltimore. You will see today on top of that building an exact replica of the Disneyland rocket to the moon, which was in the park from day one and until 1964, I believe. It was the centerpiece of Tomorrowland, the old TWA red and white rocket ship. And what you're seeing actually is a recreation of the original recreation of the Disneyland rocket. But by that, here's what I mean. In 1955, when Disneyland opened, TWA was one of the corporate partners or corporate sponsors of various attractions. Specifically, the rocket to the moon was sponsored by TWA. The centerpiece, the weenie, that is the visual attraction that drew people from the hub into Tomorrowland, was the 80-foot tall TWA rocket to the moon. And it was taller than anything else in the park. Even the castle was not 80 feet tall. The Disneyland castle is actually a fairly small castle compared to Disney World's castle. But that TWA rocket ship was so beautiful. And John Hinch is the Imagineer who's credited with designing it. But it looked just like a classic 1950s science fiction rocket ought to look. And it's got a little cockpit up at the top and portholes at 2 levels around it. And when you went into that attraction, when you went into the ride building, you were supposedly entering inside this rocket ship. You're in a round chamber with concentric rows of, I think, 3 rows of seats. And in the center floor was a film screen, not a video screen, but an actual film projector screen, if I understand correctly, and another one on the ceiling. So the whole little room would shake as the rocket blasts off. You'd see the blast on the screen on the bottom. It would slowly become Disneyland, and then Disneyland would shrink, and you'd see, Southern California, and then the whole United States, and then the upper screen would turn dark, and the stars would come out. It was a pretty neat. It was a pretty neat impression of what a rocket ride would be like. And you would go, you'd go through a meteor storm, and they had somebody throw rocks at the outside of the chamber. But you'd hear the meteors hitting the rocket. The captain would be doing announcements all the way through this ride. You'd go up to the moon. You'd circle around the moon, and then for just a moment, you would get a tantalizing glimpse of a lost civilization on the dark side of the moon. You never would see it long enough to really see details, but it was there. And then you would come back and land on Disneyland again. Well, I mean, that ride was pretty cool. But the rocket ship that symbolized that ride was one of the neatest things in the park. And so Howard Hughes, eccentric billionaire, I think the phrase was created for Howard Hughes. The eccentric billionaire Howard Hughes owned TWA Airlines. He had just built this brand new building in downtown Kansas City. And in fact, the way that building was built is a whole other story. I mean, they built the top story first, jacked it up, built the second story under it, jacked that up, and built the ground floor underneath those 2. They thought that's how all buildings would be built in the future. And that turned out not to be true. I swear to God, that's how that building was built. And the crowning glory was that Hughes, he had to sign off on this. I don't know if it was his idea, but he was the one who approved of building a recreation of the Disneyland TWA Moonliner in Kansas City. So it was on the roof of that building. And it stayed there until Douglas Aircraft took over sponsorship of the rocket, the attraction, the Rocket to the Moon ride. And I believe that was in 1961. So after that, it said Douglas Aircraft on the rocket, and TWA didn't want to, keep their rocket, so they sold it to a guy that made camper shells and fiberglass camper shells and similar vehicle bodies, I guess, out of fiberglass in Kansas City. And that company was called Spacecraft. So somebody says, you need to have, the guy's name was John Mace, said, John, you need to have this rocket ship. This would go great with the Spacecraft RV company. And so Mr. May buys the rocket ship and moves it to his company out in Independence, Missouri. And then he moves his company over to Concordia, Missouri, which is about, an hour west on Interstate 70. And I first saw the rocket when it stood near I-70 there for many years. I thought, that's a cool rocket. I wish I had a rocket like that. But I didn't know it was a Disneyland rocket until a great book about Disneyland history, the best one, I think, so far, The Nickel Tour. Now, that book's hard to find and it's expensive, but it was done by 2 Imagineers, David Mumford and Bruce Gordon. They did a fantastic history. It's called Nickel Tour because postcards used to be a nickel, and it's almost all postcard images of early Disneyland. And their page on the rocket says, like in a footnote, says, did you know there's another TWA Moonliner in Missouri at a trailer park? When I saw that, I thought, damn, that's the Moonliner, that rocket in Concordia. And my God, I went over there with pictures of the original Moonliner and walked over to that thing, and instantly it's obvious that it is. It's a perfect recreation of the original Disneyland Moonliner. So I get hold of Mr. May. I say, hey, is there any chance you might want to let go of that rocket ship? That old rusty rocket ship sitting out there? And he says, well, there is. In fact, I'm getting ready to retire. I'm selling my whole operation. You want to buy that rocket ship? Sure, I'll sell it to you. And so I bought it immediately. And it took me a while to figure out how to get it. I mean, the thing is 30 feet tall. It's not 80 like the original. It's 30 feet tall. but still pretty big, And the legs on this thing, it's like a big giant tripod. They're too high to go under the bridges on Interstate 70. So lucky I have a friend, a rocket scientist, he now claims to be, and he foresaw that, and we built a trailer specifically for this rocket ship. We got a gigantic crane, he had to use an arc, torch to cut it loose from its moorings, and then we pick it up and we lay it on this bed of giant tractor tires, and we take it back to Columbia. And over the next couple of years, Don restores this rocket ship. It was in terrible shape. It had wasp nests and birds' nests, and the little birds' poop had washed down and rusted the body of the whole thing, and parts were missing. It was horrible, but he brought that thing back, and he restored it perfectly to its original appearance. And you know how we did the TWA logo and the red stripes around it and got them perfectly? And it was Don's idea. I had these old plastic model kits, which were, issued in the 50s, Strombecker plastic model kit of the Disneyland rocket ship. And of course, they have a sheet of decals in there. So we scanned the decals, blow them up 100 times, and you got a perfect decal for the large scale rocket. So man, when those were put on, that was like the finishing touch. It was just thrilling to see that thing. So we finished it, and I told Don, I said, Don, your deadline to finish this is Walt Disney's 100th birthday, which of course was technically it was December the 5th of 2001. Well, they in Marceline held a big 100th birthday for Walt, but they didn't want to do it in the middle of the winter, so they did that in September. And it was about September 21st of 2001. Well, if you're old enough, you may recall that 9/11/2001, a day that will live in infamy, that was 10 days before Walt's 100th birthday in Marceline. In other words, the bombing of the World Trade Center at the Pentagon, that happened 10 days before the 100th birthday party. So no airplanes were flying for a couple of weeks at least after that horrible incident. No air flew in the United States. Nobody could fly to the 100th birthday party, and lots of people were planning on flying into that event. But we took our rocket ship up to Marceline, got the rocket trailer out, carefully put the restored rocket back on the rocket trailer, and Don had worked out an ingenious way to actually suspend it so that it wasn't damaged when it was horizontal. And one leg was removable so it would fit underneath the bridges on I-70. But I was really worried that government surveillance satellites are going to see this 30-foot missile going 10 days after 9/11, and we might get some attention. As far as I know, nothing untoward happened. So we get to Marceline, we set the thing up, get it back up vertical again, and it was like, a little part of the 100th birthday party there. So after that, we took it into Kansas City for a few special Disney events. But finally, I placed it at the Airline History Museum. Now, Amanda, on Broadway Street, if you go right across the river on the Broadway Bridge, and just as you get across the river is the old Wheeler Downtown Airport on the left. And if you have to go around a roundabout and then make a sharp turn back to the left, you go around and you pass the TWA Museum. It's confusing, because my rocket is not in the TWA Museum. If you just keep on going around the tarmac, it's in a great big old hangar where the Airline History Museum is located. And the Connie, the Constellation aircraft that you've seen in old movies and TV shows, it has the triple rudder, the most beautiful propeller-driven aircraft ever made, according to many aircraft fans, is the Constellation. And the only Constellation still flying in America, at least, is the one at the Airline History Museum in Kansas City. Well, they also now house the Moonliner from 1956. The one that was originally on the building at 18th and Baltimore is now over at the Airline History Museum. Well, there's one important difference between the rocket, the original Kansas City Moonliner at the Airline History Museum, and the recreation of that rocket ship, which is now on top of the building at 18th and Baltimore. In other words, the new rocket sits exactly where mine originally sat. And when Brad Nicholson, he got historic tax credits to restore the old TWA building, and he had to make the building look like it originally looked. He needed a TWA Moonliner in order to do that. he came to me and said, I'd like to buy your rocket and put it back where it came from. And I thought about that for about 5 minutes. I said, that's where it was intended to be, but I've just spent a lot of money restoring it to its original beautiful appearance. If we put it back up there, it'll start rusting again. So I don't want to do that. I wish I'd seen how much he would bid, but I didn't want to sell it. I said, I will let you reproduce it. Send your guys over here. They can measure it, they can photograph it, and they can reproduce it. And that's what he did. So it is literally a reproduction of the rocket, which is now at the Airline History Museum. No other city in the world, including Anaheim, has ever had 2 moonliners except for Kansas City, Missouri. Now, here's the difference between the 2 rocket ships. The original rocket ship had a vault built into the side of it. Way up high, opposite the cockpit, is a little door. It's probably about 10 by 14 inches. And this little door on the back of the rocket ship was designed to be the repository for the entries in the Cosmic Contest. Now, the Cosmic Contest was sponsored by TWA in 1956, which was the 30th anniversary of the founding of TWA. And they always said the TWA Moonliner, that's what we're going to be flying in 1986, the distant future of 1986. We'll be flying to the moon and back on moonliners just like this one. And so the Cosmic Contest, everybody who got on a TWA flight that year was handed an entry form for the Cosmic Contest. It was a 2-part contest. The first part was to describe why air travel is the best way to travel and why TWA is the best airline. And whoever was chosen won $50,000, whoever gave the best entry. And among the judges was Werner von Braun, the German rocket scientist from World War II, Willy Ley, a very famous science writer, and Walt Disney was one of the judges, allegedly. I don't think he sat there and read all these entries, but he was at least among those who chose the finalists, or chose among the finalists, I suspect. Well, the Cosmic Contest second part was to predict what air travel would be like in the distant future of 1986, 30 years in the future. And so, a lot of people imagined fantastic things. They thought that surely airplanes will travel faster than the speed of sound. And, some people thought they'd have swimming pools on airplanes. And some people thought they'd go into space and orbit around and come back into the atmosphere. And it turned out airplanes didn't really change that much in those 30 years. They had jet planes in 1956. That wasn't really that big a change. And they don't let planes go faster than the speed of sound because they create sound waves. They create sonic booms. So one lady said, airplanes are going to be pretty much like they are today. You're not going to find that fast. And, there'll be jets, of course, because everybody knew about jets in 1956. And by golly, and I researched this, I was so happy to find that TWA kept its word. Now, I'm missing the important point. Well, let me finish. That this lady gets a phone call one day and says, "Ma'am, this is TWA, and you've just won $50,000 in the Cosmic Contest." And she says, "What are you talking about? I never entered any contest." They said, "Yes, you did. Back in 1956, you entered this contest." And she, so they sent her the check. It cleared, and that's when she believed it. So she wins $50,000 for just scratching out a couple of paragraphs 30 years earlier. Well, the rocket ship, the vault in the side of the rocket ship, was the repository for those entries. They were not paper. They were filmed, they were photographed and microfilmed, and so all the entries would fit into this little box built into the side of the TWA Moonliner, and that's where they sat until 1961, when Douglas Aircraft took over sponsorship of the Rocket to the Moon ride. TWA took those microfilmed entries out and put them in a regular old bank vault, and they sat there until 1986. And so that is the purpose of that little compartment built into the side of the rocket. So I've dug up, I found entry blanks in the Cosmic Contest. I found advertisements for the Cosmic Contest, and all of the story is true.
That's very interesting.
Wow.
Now I'm talking obscure Disneyland history here.
Yeah, for sure.
But it's kind of neat. So we got to talk about all of that stuff. in this book right here, Walt Disney's Missouri, now out of print, but available through Amazon, through eBay. And I got to work with Brian Burns, who's still a great history writer for the Kansas City Star, and Robert Butler, who is still writing on a freelance basis, but occasionally for the Kansas City Star. And these pictures on the front, especially, again, I know your listeners can't see them, but listeners, when you find a copy of this book online or wherever, you'll see on the cover 2 photographs of Walt Disney. One is of Walt in Kansas City. There was a photographer in the same building, in our Lafagran building, named Baron Masakian, an Armenian photographer. And when Walt was working there in the building, Masakian took a bunch of portraits of him. So this sepia tone picture of Walt is from 1922 or 3. On the right-hand side, you see Walt Disney 10 years later. In 1932, 31 or 2, he came back to Kansas City, went back to our building, saw his old pal, Baron Masakian. Baron took more photos of him since he was famous now. This is like Walt before Mickey and Walt after Mickey. And, at first they look very different. But if you look closely, it's exactly the same pose, the same expression, the same eyes, the same mouth, with a mustache on it. It's really, he changed very little during that period of time. Well, this photo, the sepia tone photo, had never been published before our book came out. And it was Brian Burns who located a treasure trove of photos. Baron Masakian's archive is in what's called the Linda Hall Library at University of Missouri at Kansas City. And that's where not only that picture, but a whole bunch of other similar pictures of Walt Disney reside. But that photo and no other photo by Masakian had ever been published before this book came out. So
Wow.
I'm kind of proud of that book.
Yeah, I did do a
Yeah.
little bit of research on trying to find the book. I did find a few copies from around anywhere $38 to $65. So it's very sporadic. You're going to have to go through and do a Google
Right.
search, but you can find some copies of this book.
Mhm.
So
Absolutely right.
Dan, well, thank you so much. I know that we went pretty long. We didn't expect it to go that long, but I kind of figured that we would. So I guess final
I
thoughts.
didn't. Yes.
What is a good way that people can give back for your project for Thank You Walt Disney and the renovations at the building?
Thank you for asking. And that's to go to our website, of course. Go to thankyouwaltdisney.org. And we've got our website in pretty good shape these days. It's up to date. We think you should have no problem making a donation. And I hope and I urge, I ask you to please make a monthly donation, as I do, of course, and all of our board members and anyone who asks that question. Say, go to thankyouwaltdisney.org and please make a monthly pledge of support to help this project come to fruition, and then come back to Kansas City and see the studio where Walt Disney's career began.
I'm very excited. Like Amanda said earlier, we actually took a trip to the building, and I'm really excited to see what it looks like after the renovations are done.
Me
It will
too.
look much better, I promise you.
Well, Dan,
Thank
thank
you.
you so much for joining us today. It was a wealth of information, and I'm sure we could sit here and talk for hours upon hours
Yeah.
about your experience and your knowledge on Disney. So thank you so much.
Well, you're welcome. Anytime. Be happy to come back on. Have a nice afternoon.
All right.
Thank you. You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right. We want to thank Dan Viets one last time for coming on the show. It was a lot of information. Very awesome. I think that everyone is going to enjoy this episode. So thank you, Dan. It was a pleasure to have you on the show. Let's go ahead and get into some mousekeeping. We want to promote our YouTube channel. It is at bit.ly/T3M YouTube, and that's the number 3, and it's all lowercase. We do videos every other week, live stream, and you can either watch them on Facebook or YouTube live, or you can watch them on YouTube after we're done. So definitely go and subscribe and click the notification bell so you get updated whenever we have new episodes come out every other Thursday that we're not on the podcast. If you love the show, let us know. Leaving us a 5-star written review is the best way to let us know how we're doing and if we're covering the topics that you want us to cover.
Let me plan the trip of your dreams. Whether you're looking for a Disney vacation, all-inclusive resort, or international destination, I am here to help. Contact me when you're ready for your free, no obligation quote. And don't forget, my services are completely free. You can contact me through Facebook at Amanda Hollis, Capture the Magic Vacations, and you can find all of my contact information in the show notes.
Join us for our next episode releasing Thursday, the 4th of March. We're going to be talking about the history of the Carousel of Progress. That one's going to be a fun one. It definitely goes back pretty far. Be sure you're subscribed to the show so that you're updated when a new episode comes out every other Thursday.
All right, that's going to do it for this episode. Thank you all for listening. You can also be a part of the magic by following the show at T3M Podcast on all social media platforms. That's T3M Podcast. Leave us a 5-star written review and we'll read it on an upcoming episode. If you have an announcement that you want to have on the show or just want to reach out to us, you can send us an email at t3mpodcast@gmail.com.
Have a zippity-doo-dah day.
See you real soon.